Okay, team, happy Monday and welcome to Civics. Now, this Google slide probably looks familiar because it was posted to the classroom last week. Now, if you understood the concepts in the slideshow and you feel comfortable moving forward, by all means, you can skip this video and move on to the next one. If you are looking for clarity around some of the topics discussed in the slideshow from last week, please continue watching this one to the end and then move on to the next set. But officially, welcome to Civics, and welcome to the point 5 of the curriculum dedicated to understanding government procedures and your rights and responsibilities as a citizen. Now, the government has been very active in the past couple of weeks, past month or so, in response to the COVID-19 crisis. And as a result, you have seen a lot of policy in action and a lot of policy put in place. And I think one of the things that comes to mind when you probably hear people talking about COVID-19 or the response to it is, the speed at which things were done, questions about what's being done, questions about policy being put in place, who is it most effective for, why are we doing this, ideas, etc. Hopefully by the end of this point 5 of the semester, you'll understand a little bit about why governments are putting policies in place and how they have to respond as a global citizen as well. First and foremost, bringing it back just to Canada, civics are our rights and duties of citizenship as a member of a political community. So a political community for us means Canada as a whole, absolutely, but then also Ontario and then also Toronto. I'm sure you've noticed each day, whether you're watching CP24, whether you're getting news bites from family members or friends, people are telling you what so-and-so said. And if at the federal level, what Justin Trudeau was saying, at the provincial level, what Doug Ford is saying, and then at the municipal level, what John Tory is saying. And all of those things are portions of our political communities, and they're important to us because those are the people that are watching out for our interest at different levels. Now, in exchange for following policy or in exchange for following laws and regulations, you as a citizen are guaranteed rights and freedoms. And if you look at countries around the world, they're not necessarily the same. So moving forward, we'll get into some of ours with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which I posted last week if you took a look at it. But further through the course, you'll understand, I think, a little bit more why some of those are good to have. In Canada, we follow a system of government procedures. So the government itself is a system by which a group of people make laws that are enforced to guide the affairs of the community. Again, in Canada, we have different levels for this. Laws are principles and regulations that govern a community which are enforced by political authority and court decisions. Why is it necessary to have laws and governments in place? So let's think about your shipwreck scenarios for a minute here. You had to decide just a bunch of tasks. You had to decide where you were going to live on the island. You had to decide who was going to be in charge. You had to decide what you were going to eat, etc. You're on this island forever. You're not going to be rescued. How are you going to develop a community there that is going to get along and function so that everybody can live the best life that they can? You had to decide how decisions were going to be made, but also how policies were going to be enforced. And this can seem easy off the bat when you think about an island or like the shipwreck scenario. It's, a small enough group of people that if you wanted everybody to debate on an issue and come to an agreement, you might be able to do so. However, as you try to scale out and you look at things from a bigger level, what happens as you add to the population, or what happens in countries where there are larger populations? Not everybody is going to be able to have a say in everything all the time. Or if they do, what are the negatives to doing something like that? Are there benefits to it? Are there benefits to one person making decisions for everybody? Or are there negatives that can come with it if that person maybe doesn't understand the needs of the entire community or recognize them the same way? There are three types of governments that we're looking at specifically, or there are three types of decision-making, actually, that we're looking at. One is authoritarian, so one person making power, or one person in power who makes all the decisions. Sometimes it can be a small group. Democratic, form of decision-making in which all people have a vote. And then consensus, which is where a group comes to one singular agreement. So the difference between democratic and consensus is when everybody agrees. Democratic is when majority rules. In an authoritarian government, some of the characteristics that come with it, and you can think about authoritarian governments often dominated by one person, so you might have heard of this as a dictatorship, allows little or no input from the people, is often dominated by one person. If dictators try to carry out the will of the people, they might have very widespread approval, but if they don't, if they're doing something maybe that is not the will of the people or not something that the people want, they don't necessarily tolerate opposition, and they will use force for control. For example, authoritarian countries very often have a large military, police, informers, secret police. If you want to think back to the Soviet Union, which hopefully if you had history semester 1, or as you move through history this semester, when we think about the Soviet Union under Stalin, Stalin was known for being an effective leader in terms of economics and policy, but also for not tolerating anybody who went against him. And the way that he was able to do this was by having informants who would tell him if people were speaking out against him, and by having a secret police service who would remove those who were in an opposition against him. Authoritarian governments will authoritarian governments will also at times control things like the media, schools, and public events to build support for their policies. So, even the way that history is learned in school, or the way that stories are told or kids are taught, is going to be very pro-leader policy versus ground in absolute fact. Democratic governments, on the other hand, are a form of decision-making in which all group members have a vote. So democratic governments are supposed to make decisions based on the will of the people. Citizens choose individuals in elections to represent them in government, and they tolerate opposition, which can be expressed by other political parties. Political parties, as an FYI, are organizations of people who share similar political beliefs. So you'll have seen political parties shown, like the Liberals, Conservatives, NDP, especially throughout the past couple of weeks. After our majority government speaks, sometimes you'll see members of the opposition. So all of the people you see in power, whether it's Trudeau, Ford, or Tory, have been voted for in an election. That is where you, as a citizen, express your belief in who should run the country, but also fulfill your duty as a citizen to vote for the people you think will best run each specific political community. Now, when you see Justin Trudeau speaking, the reason that he is the leader of the country is because the Liberal Party that he is part of got more votes than the Conservatives or the NDP, and he is the leader of that party. Sometimes you'll also see Andrew Scheer, who is the leader of the Conservatives, the party that got the next amount of votes, criticizing or supporting something that Trudeau is doing. Especially in recent weeks, everybody is trying more so to move things forward for the benefit of the country, but Andrew Scheer will still say, I think Trudeau should be showing us this, or I think that this is a good idea, or this is a bad idea. And that's how the opposition works. It's the thing that tries to keep the government the most fair so that one party can't just do what they want without anybody trying to stop them. The way authoritarian governments treat people differs greatly. In authoritarian governments, individuals are seen as subjects. They are under absolute control of the government and subject to its command. An easy way to remember this is that people work for the government. So, for example, The communist government of the Soviet Union gave their people subsidized housing, education, and social benefits, but actually owned all the land and all the property. So people could live on the land, but it wasn't actually their property. Anything that they were taking from it belonged to the government. So they were working for the government. Individuals in a democracy are citizens, and this is where our voting and our rights and our freedoms come into play. Citizens are free to participate in politics and act to bring about change. People in a democracy can vote, they can hold office, they have rights, and many are provided social benefits. So in Canada, pensions, employment insurance, and healthcare. You'll also note, especially in these current times, benefits and policies are being added around different groups of people. So whether it's layoffs, being able to apply for a new benefit and the money coming in faster, or whether it is the province handing out money for parents who are struggling to find childcare, etc. In this table, you can see just sort of the difference between the two. In a democratic government, you have two or more political parties versus an authoritarian government only having one. In democratic governments, you have free press, free speech, and free media. In an authoritarian government, these are controlled. It is often censored. In a democratic government, you have frequent, fair elections. In an authoritarian government, sometimes the elections are fake, or there are no elections at all, or the rights surrounding an election have been changed. In democratic government, equal legal rights. In authoritarian government, not so much. In democratic governments, the courts are also free from the control of the overall government, whereas authoritarian governments are very often under political control. And then back and forth. In democratic governments, minorities are respected. In authoritarian governments, sometimes this is not so. In governments, both power and politics work together. A person's authority, or the right that they have to give orders and make decisions, will only last as long as people believe or can be persuaded that they are the best decision maker. The first task of a government is to preserve order, and you need to find a way to enforce decisions. This, for example, is how governments show their power. So, there's no point in having a law if people aren't going to follow that law. And if you're going to have a law, you have to assume that there are going to be people who don't necessarily follow it for the benefit of the community. They have their own self-interest, or they think their own things, and what happens when that person decides to go against it? What are you going to do as a government to decide that that can be enforced? So, for example, we've seen in the city of Toronto, and even in Mississauga, Peel, etc., that for the time being, a bylaw is in place surrounding social distancing. So if you are seen in a public space, especially one owned by the city, like a city park, within a meter or 6 feet of somebody from another household, that you can be fined for being too close to that person. Now that bylaw or that law isn't in place temporarily for the benefit of the community at large. Some people are deciding, I don't agree with what they're doing, so I'm going to do what I want to do anyway. Those who want to social distance can social distance. I don't want to. I think I'm healthy, etc. The government has decided that, for the benefit of the community, they are temporarily going to enforce a law that says, even if you want to do that, we don't want you to. So if you're caught doing it, we're going to give you a fine. Some people are for the policy. Some people are against the policy. The government has made the decision in what they feel is the best interest of the people. So they have the power to enforce that decision because they were voted in. They are the authority. We gave them the option of being in power, or we gave them the opportunity to be in power. As such, they can enforce their decisions. Now, anytime they make a decision like this, it's important to note that they're not in power forever. We have free elections, or we have frequent elections. So if a government makes a group of people unhappy, the odds are in the next election, they will give up their power. The way that governments use power is that in authoritarian governments, they rely heavily on threat. Actually, I'm going to make this 2 parts. Stay tuned for part 2.